Right now, in May 2026, there are hundreds of millions of people running an operating system that Microsoft abandoned 7 months ago. Windows 10 support officially ended on October 14, 2025. Not quietly, not with a grace period most people actually noticed. It just ended, and what Microsoft offered in return was a paid subscription, an annual fee to keep receiving security patches for an operating system you already bought, running on hardware you already own. That program, the Extended Security Updates offering, gives individuals the option to keep receiving critical patches after support ended. You are paying rent on something you already purchased outright. That detail alone should make you furious, and yet the mainstream technology conversation keeps dancing around it, softening the edges, treating it as a minor inconvenience rather than what it actually is. I spent a serious amount of time going through the real numbers before putting this together, and here is what I found. As of the end of support date, 40% of all Windows users worldwide were still running Windows 10, hundreds of millions of devices, immediately facing security risks the moment that deadline passed. That is not a niche edge case. That is nearly half the entire Windows user base left exposed, forced into a three-way choice. Pay Microsoft for something they already own, buy new hardware to qualify for Windows 11, or find a third path entirely. And that third option, the one nobody at Microsoft wants you to take seriously, is exactly what we are going to talk about today. I want to be direct about why this exists. I have personally been through this transition. I tested these distributions myself. I watched people around me try and fail and try again, and the pattern I kept seeing was the same problem every time. Not the technology, the perception. People hear the word Linux and they picture a black screen with blinking white text and someone who looks like they have not slept in 3 days. That image is more than a decade out of date. Modern Linux distributions in 2026 are genuinely, seriously, legitimately good. Some of them are so close to the Windows experience that you will spend your first day wondering why you waited this long. The most visible catalyst for this shift was that hard calendar deadline in October 2025, which forced users with otherwise perfectly functional hardware blocked by Windows 11's stricter requirements around TPM 2.0, secure boot, and CPU gating, toward alternatives. Those requirements are not protecting you, they are protecting Microsoft's hardware sales cycle. Your 5-year-old laptop runs perfectly. The software on it works. The only reason it cannot run Windows 11 is because Microsoft drew an arbitrary line. Linux has no such line. It runs on machines from 2010 with full modern browser support, up-to-date security, and a desktop that looks better than anything Microsoft has shipped in the last 3 years. Before we get into the specific distributions, I want to make one thing absolutely clear, because most comparison videos skip this entirely. The question is not whether Linux can replace Windows. At this point in 2026, for most users, it absolutely can. The real question is which Linux distribution fits the way your brain already works, because Linux is not one thing. It is a family of operating systems built on the same foundation but with wildly different personalities. Some are built for power users who want to configure everything from scratch. Others are built specifically, deliberately, and obsessively for people coming from Windows who just want their computer to work without a philosophy lesson. 7 of those distributions are what we are covering today, and I ranked them from the most Windows-like experience at the top to the most capable but slightly more different experience toward the bottom. If you have never touched Linux before, pay close attention to the first 2 or 3. If you have dabbled, or if you are a power user ready for something more refined, stay with it, because the back half of this list is where things get genuinely interesting, and stay until the end because I am going to walk you through the actual switching process, what to do about your files, your programs, your games, all of it. No vague advice, just exactly what I would do if I were sitting down to make this switch today. The first distribution, the one I personally point every Windows refugee toward first, is Zorin OS, specifically Zorin OS 18.1, which arrived in April 2026 with significant improvements aimed at smoothing the transition from Windows while boosting performance across supported hardware. I want you to understand what makes this distribution genuinely different from everything else on this list, because it is not just about aesthetics. The entire operating system was built from the ground up with one specific user in mind, someone who has used Windows their whole life and is terrified of change. When you boot into or in OS 18.1 for the first time, you will experience something genuinely disorienting. Your brain will keep telling you that you are looking at Windows, because the taskbar is exactly where you expect it. The Start menu is in the bottom left corner. The system clock and notification icons sit in the bottom right. The application icons on the taskbar behave exactly like you are used to. Right-click menus work the way you expect. Drag and drop works the way you expect. File manager navigation works the way you expect. The developers did not try to reinvent anything. They reverse-engineered familiarity itself. The latest release added smarter window tilling options and an expanded application database that now suggests native Linux alternatives when it detects common Windows installers. Drivers were updated to support NVIDIA graphics cards, Intel Xe3 GPUs, and AMD hybrid laptop setups out of the box, without any extra configuration needed. That last part matters enormously. Driver headaches were historically the #1 complaint from Windows users trying Linux for the first time, and Zorin OS 18.1 eliminated that friction for the overwhelming majority of modern hardware configurations. You plug in your machine, install the operating system, and it just works. The layout switching system in Zorin deserves its own mention. One button. That is all it takes to switch between a Windows 11 style interface with a centered taskbar, a Windows 10 style layout with the traditional left-aligned start button, or even a Windows 7 style layout if you have been running the same muscle memory. Since 2009, you are not locked into any single look, and existing users can update via the software updater without erasing files, while the distribution itself carries extended security support until June 2029. That security timeline alone should get your attention. You are not paying for it. It is simply included. The second distribution on this list is Linux Mint, and if Zorin OS is the flashiest Windows replacement, Linux Mint is the most trusted. This is the distribution that has consistently topped beginner recommendation lists for the better part of a decade, and the reason is simple. Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu and Debian, installs in minutes, and comes with multimedia codecs, a familiar desktop layout, and no Snap dependencies. That last point about Snap will matter a lot to power users. But for newcomers, it mostly means that software installs faster, takes less disk space, and opens more quickly than on Ubuntu's default setup. Linux Mint 22.3 is now powered by the Linux 6.17 kernel, which means dramatically improved hardware support compared to releases from even 18 months ago. Newer Wi-Fi chipsets, better power management on modern laptops, improved support for USB 4 and Thunderbolt devices. The practical effect is that Mint now works out of the box on a much wider range of hardware than most people expect. The Cinnamon desktop environment that comes as the default in Linux Mint is genuinely the closest you will get to a classic Windows 10 workflow without any tweaking at all. The menu system is cleaner than anything Microsoft has shipped in years. You type what you want in the search bar and it appears. No Bing results embedded. In your start menu, no AI suggestions you did not ask for. No news headlines from sources you never subscribed to. Just your programs, your files, and your search results. The software manager works like an app store where literally everything is free and nothing requires your credit card or a Microsoft account. Install Spotify, Discord, Steam, VLC, whatever you need. All from one place, all verified and trusted. The third distribution is Kubuntu, and this is where things get meaningfully different from the first two. Kubuntu is official Ubuntu with the KDE Plasma desktop environment replacing the default shell, and the result is something that is simultaneously more Windows-like in certain ways and more powerful in others. KDE Plasma 6.5 brought major updates through 2025 and into 2026, delivering a modern desktop environment that remains one of the most customizable available anywhere. The default layout gives you a taskbar at the bottom, a start menu that opens with a panel of categories and a pinned search bar, application shortcuts along the taskbar, and a system tray in the bottom right. It maps almost perfectly onto the mental model that Windows 10 built in your head over the last decade, but what separates KDE Plasma from everything else is the depth of customization available through a graphical interface, without ever needing to open a terminal. Want to move the taskbar to the top? 3 clicks. Want to add a widget showing your CPU temperature directly on the desktop? 2 clicks. Want to change the window decoration style? Right-click, System Settings, Apply, for people who spent years tweaking Windows with third-party tools just to get the experience they actually wanted. Kubuntu hands you that control natively. The fourth entry is Ubuntu itself, the foundation that many other distributions on this list are built on top of. Ubuntu matters for one specific reason that gets undersold in most comparison videos: hardware compatibility. Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, actively works with hardware manufacturers to certify compatibility. That means your Wi-Fi card, your graphics chip, your printer, and your webcam are far more likely to work on Ubuntu than on distributions that do not have those manufacturer relationships. Ubuntu does use the GNOME desktop environment by default, which is the most visually different from Windows on this portion of the list. The workflow takes a few days to internalize, but once you start launching everything with a super key and a few keystrokes, you will realize you were never actually clicking your windows. Taskbar because you enjoyed it. You were doing it because it was the only option you had. Ubuntu also matters practically for developers, because it has become increasingly integral with cloud computing services, making it not just a good distribution for easing beginners into Linux, but one for building long-term skills that carry over into professional environments. The fifth distribution is one I spent more time with than any other during my own research, and every time I come back to it I am reminded why it consistently surprises people who write it off as just another Ubuntu fork. Pop! OS from System 76 is not trying to be the most Windows-like option, it is trying to be the best desktop. Linux experience for people who actually use their computers intensively, and in 2026, it has made a move that separates it from everything else on this list. Pop! OS now features the Rust-based Cosmic desktop, which entered public beta in September 2025 with auto-tilling, exceptional NVIDIA and AMD driver support, and a dedicated recovery partition. Cosmic is not a skin on top of GNOME, it is a completely new desktop environment built from scratch in Rust, which means it is faster, more stable, and architecturally cleaner than anything built on older foundations. The Cosmic desktop in its current state feels deliberate in a way that Windows has not felt in years. Every interaction has a clear logic behind it. Windows are managed with intention. Workspaces are first-class citizens rather than a buried feature nobody uses. The application launcher works the way your brain works, not the way a product manager decided it should work after 3 rounds of committee review, and the auto-tilling feature, which automatically arranges your open windows to fill the screen without overlapping, is the kind of workflow upgrade that makes you genuinely resent having to use Windows on someone else's machine. The gaming situation on Pop! OS deserves specific attention, because this is where System 76 has historically invested serious engineering resources. Proton 9.0, released in early 2026, now supports over 90% of the top 1,000 Steam games with Platinum or Gold ratings, meaning they run perfectly or with only minor issues that do not affect gameplay. On Pop! OS, those drivers are pre-configured correctly out of the box. You install Steam, enable Proton in the settings, and your entire library becomes available immediately. There is no hunting for GPU drivers, no compatibility headaches with NVIDIA cards, no choosing between performance and stability. System 76 handled all of that before the installer even hit your USB drive. Linux gaming reached 5.33% market share on Steam in March 2026, driven by Steam Deck adoption, Proton compatibility improvements, and the Windows 10 end of support pushing users toward alternatives. That number sounds small until you remember what the Steam user base actually looks like. 5% of hundreds of millions of registered accounts is not a niche. It is a real and growing market, and Valve is investing accordingly. Valve released Proton 11 beta in April 2026 with further improvements for running Windows games on Linux, and Proton Experimental was updated shortly after with the latest versions of the key compatibility layers underneath. If you are a gamer who has been holding back from switching because you were worried about your library, the situation in mid-2026 is genuinely better than it has ever been. Check Proton for your specific titles. The results will probably surprise you. Pop! OS also ships with a recovery partition built directly into the drive, which is a detail that matters more than most people realize before they actually need it. If something breaks, which is rare but possible especially when you are learning a new system, you reboot into recovery mode and restore your working state without needing a USB drive or an internet connection. That safety net removes one of the biggest psychological barriers to exploring and customizing your system freely. The sixth distribution is KDE Neon, and the reason it earns a separate spot from Kubuntu despite sharing the KDE Plasma desktop is important enough to explain directly. Kubuntu takes Ubuntu's stable base and adds a version of KDE Plasma that is tested and packaged by the Ubuntu team. KDE Neon takes the same Ubuntu ELT space but ships the absolute latest KDE Plasma released directly from the KDE developers themselves the moment it is ready. If KDE Plasma 6.6 ships today, KDE Neon users have it within days. Kubuntu users might wait months for it to flow through Ubuntu's packaging pipeline. KDE Plasma 6.6.4 was shipping in distributions as of May 2026. And the KDE Mega Sprint of early 2026 resulted in significant performance and feature improvements across the entire Plasma desktop stack. KDE Neon is the fastest path to those improvements on a stable base. KDE Neon is specifically for the Windows Power user who spent years using third-party tools like Rainmeter, custom shells, window blinds, and taskbar replacements, trying to bend Windows into the shape they actually wanted. KDE Neon gives you all of that customization depth natively, with better performance, better stability, and no licensing cost. The visual possibilities are genuinely staggering. You can make it look like Windows 11 with translucent panels and a centered taskbar. You can make it look like something completely original that nobody has seen before. You can change your window decorations, your icon theme, your cursor, your animations, your panel behavior, your widget layout, everything through a graphical interface without breaking anything. The honest trade-off is worth naming directly. Because KDE Neon ships the newest Plasma releases quickly, occasional bugs make it through that would be caught in a slower distribution cycle. If a new Plasma update introduces a visual glitch or a settings panel that behaves unexpectedly, KDE Neon users will see it before anyone else. Most issues are minor and resolved within days, but if you want the absolute safest experience with no surprises, Kubuntu is more appropriate. If you want the newest features as fast as possible and you are comfortable reporting a bug when you find one, KDE Neon is where you want to be. The seventh and final entry is Fedora Workstation, and I want to be straight about why it is on this list even though it is the most different from Windows. Fedora is what you use when you want to stop just using Linux and start actually understanding it. Fedora 43 launched in October 2025 with GNOME 49 and a new web-based installer, continuing Fedora's pattern of shipping the newest upstream software versions before any other major distribution. Linus Torvalds, the person who created the Linux kernel itself, runs Fedora on his personal machines. That is not a marketing claim. That is a statement about where the most technically current and honestly packaged Linux experience lives. Fedora ships unmodified GNOME exactly as the developers designed it. No corporate customizations layered on top. No default applications chosen for business reasons. No telemetry added behind the scenes. What the GNOME team intended you to experience is exactly what Fedora delivers. The system is lean, fast, and architecturally clean, in a way that benefits from the Red Hat engineering investment behind it. Package updates arrive faster than on Ubuntu. Security patches land within hours of upstream disclosure. The DNF5 package manager introduced in recent releases is genuinely faster than apt for most operations. The practical trade-off is that Fedora requires one extra step for proprietary drivers and media codecs that other distributions handle automatically. Enabling RPM Fusion, the third-party repository that fills these gaps, takes about 90 seconds and is thoroughly documented. After that, everything works. NVIDIA drivers, MP for playback, Bluetooth codecs, all of it. It is a deliberate philosophical choice by Fedora to ship only open-source software by default, and it is one you opt out of in 3 commands rather than living with forever. Now let me stop being theoretical and get completely practical, because this is the section most videos skip or rush through, and it is the section that actually determines whether you succeed or give up on day 3. The ones who struggled were not struggling because Linux was too hard. They were struggling because nobody walked them through the actual mechanics before they started. The first thing you do before you download anything, before you touch your USB drive, is back up your files. Everything important, documents, photos, videos, browser bookmarks exported as an HTML file, any game saves stored locally, any software license keys you will need later. Use an external hard drive or upload to cloud storage. This is not optional, and it is not overly cautious advice. It is the same thing you should do before any major operating system change, regardless of whether you are switching to Linux or reinstalling Windows. Get your data somewhere safe before you touch the partition table on your main drive. Once your backup is complete, go to the official website of whichever distribution you chose and download the ISO file. FORS or INOS, that is Z or in.com. For Linux Mint, it is linuxmint.com. For the others, a direct search for the distribution name will land you on the right page immediately. Then download a tool called Balena Etcher, which works on Windows, macOS, and Linux itself. Plug in a USB drive of at least 8 GB. Open Etcher, select your ISO file, select your USB drive, click Flash. The whole process takes between 5 and 10 minutes depending on your drive speed. Restart your computer and boot from the USB. On most machines, this means pressing F12, F11, F2, or delete during the startup splash screen to access the boot menu or BIOS settings. Dell machines typically use F12, Asus uses F8 or F2, Lenovo uses F12 or the dedicated Novo button, a quick search for your laptop. Model name plus boot menu key will give you the exact answer in 30 seconds. Select your USB drive from the boot menu and let it load. What you will see next is something most beginners do not expect, and it is one of the best features of modern Linux distributions. Every single distribution on this list boots into a fully functional live environment directly from the USB drive without installing anything on your computer. Your actual hard drive is not touched. You can open the browser, connect to Wi-Fi, test your audio, try the applications, and evaluate the entire experience as if the operating system was already installed. Spend 30 minutes in the live environment, make sure your touchpad works, make sure your Wi-Fi connects, make sure your display is rendering correctly. If something fundamental does not work in the live environment, it will not work after installation either, and you can try a different distribution without having committed to anything. If everything checks out, you will find an install icon on the desktop or in the application menu. Click it. The installers on every distribution in this list are graphical, step-by-step, and straightforward. You choose your language, your keyboard layout, your time zone, your username and password. The one decision that requires actual attention is the partitioning step. If you want to completely replace Windows and use the entire drive for Linux, choose the option that says Erase Disk and Install. If you want to keep Windows alongside Linux in a dual boot configuration, choose Install alongside Windows. The installer detects your existing Windows partition automatically and handles the split for you. You just drag a divider to allocate how much space each system gets. Give Linux at least 40 gigabytes, ideally more if you plan to install a lot of software. The installation itself takes between 15 and 25 minutes. When it finishes, you will be prompted to restart and remove the USB drive. Do that, press Enter, and boot into your new system. The first thing to do after logging in is open your Update Manager and install any available updates. Distributions ship ISO files periodically, and there are always some updates accumulated since the last image was built. Get those installed, restart if prompted, and then you are working on a fully current system. The Microsoft Office question comes up constantly, so let me address it directly. LibreOffice is pre-installed on most of these distributions, and it opens docs, XLSX, and PTX files reliably. For most users, it covers everything they need. If you are a heavy Excel user who depends on macros and advanced pivot tables, the web version of Microsoft 365 at office.com works perfectly in Firefox or Chrome on Linux. Every feature of the web apps is available. You do not need to install anything. For gaming, Proton shows that 89% of the 150,000 plus games tested on Steam now run on Linux, and that number keeps climbing as Valve continues investing in Proton. The honest caveat is multiplayer games with kernel-level anti-cheat software. Some of those titles do not work on Linux, and that is a real limitation. Before you switch, go to Proton right now, search your top 5 most played games, and see what the community reports. For single-player games, compatibility is excellent. For competitive multiplayer titles, you need to check individually. This is not a deal-breaker for most users, but it is something to verify before you commit rather than after. The reason most non-technical users suddenly face a binary choice right now is simple. Microsoft ended free support for Windows 10 in October 2025, forcing a decision between upgrading hardware, paying for extended security updates as a temporary stopgap, or migrating to an alternative operating system, and that word, temporary, is doing a lot of work. October 2028 is the absolute end of Windows 10 support regardless of ESU payments, so even if you pay Microsoft's annual subscription fee right now, you are buying yourself 2 years before you face this exact same decision again. 2 years of paying for something you already own, at the end of which you are back at this crossroads. The only difference is that you will have spent money and lost time getting comfortable with an operating system that is already in its end-of-life trajectory. Linux is not that. Every distribution on this list has a support timeline that extends years into the future at no cost. Zorin OS 18 is supported until 2029. Ubuntu 24.04 else receives updates until 2029 with extended security maintenance available until 2034. Linux Mint 22 follows the same Ubuntu 24.04 else base and inherits that same timeline. You are not renting these operating systems, you own them completely. You decide when to update. You decide what to install. You decide what runs in the background on your own machine. My honest recommendation, the same one I would give to someone sitting across from me asking this question directly, is to start with Linux Mint Cinnamon. It is the version most people should start with, offering modern visuals with a classic panel layout and the most familiar daily workflow available on any Linux distribution today. Use it for 30 days as your primary system, not as a side experiment, not as a dual boot curiosity you boot into once a week. Use it daily for your actual work, your actual browsing, your actual media consumption. At the end of those 30 days, you will have an informed opinion instead of a fearful assumption. If after 30 days you want something more polished and modern, move Tos or in OS 18.1. If you discover you love customization, install Kubuntu or KDE Neon. If you are a developer or power user who wants the most technically current environment available, Fedora Workstation is where you belong. The version of Windows that Microsoft is building toward is not one you are going to like. More AI features you did not ask for, running on your hardware, consuming your resources, more cloud dependency requiring your data to live on their servers, more subscription fees for features that used to be included, more telemetry collecting, behavioral data to train models and serve advertising. The direction has been obvious for 3 years and it is not changing. Linux is not a compromise you settle for because Microsoft left you no choice. It is an upgrade you choose because you decided your computer should work for you rather than the other way around. The 7 distributions we covered today prove that the transition has never been more accessible, more polished, or more worth your time. Pick one. Download the ISO tonight. You have nothing to lose except the operating system that has been charging you rent on your own hardware.